Oh, this better be good. I don't have much time. You know what we call that? We call that a web-slinging ass-kicking.
It's finally time for edgy Spider-Man to make his long-awaited comeback. Or, at the very least, I certainly hope so. But regardless, welcome back, true believers and all you merry Marvelites, to another very interesting Marvel Games-related video. One which hasn't been officially confirmed just yet, but has been recently rumored from a fairly reliable source. But if this rumored Marvel game actually ends up becoming what I'm personally hoping for the most, then I, for one, am going to be way more hyped for it if it turns out to be true. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it was recently reported from industry insider Nick Baker of the Xbox Era podcast that video game publisher EA is set to make a brand new Marvel video game. And more specifically, it might just end up being a Marvel-centric fighting game. And to elaborate upon this news a bit further, I am going to highlight this small excerpt of this article from comicbookgaming.com. which states, taking to Twitter, the Thinny relays word that according to the same source that leaked accurate information about multiverses to him, which if you don't know is a Warner Brothers centric fighting game similar to Smash Brothers, the aforementioned pair of Marvel and EA are working on a fighting game. While most sources agree that NetherRealm Studios is working on Mortal Kombat 12, there have been rumblings of it working on a Marvel fighting game. In other words, there's now some conflicting information. But according to a source, EA is the one who is working on a Marvel-centric fighting game, and not NetherRealm Studios. And while we are unsure as to how credible this source is, it still comes from similar sources pertaining to the multiverse's information. So obviously take this with a grain of salt, considering that nothing has been officially confirmed by anyone over at Marvel or EA as it stands right now. But given the fact that I'm primarily a superhero video game-centric YouTube channel who loves everything and anything pertaining to Marvel video games in particular, I just couldn't resist talking more in depth about this topic, and whether or not this potential project might not just be another Marvel game developed by EA, but possibly a revival on one of the most obscure and rather underrated Marvel games ever made. And in this case, I'm talking about Marvel Nemesis Rise of the Imperfects, which is essentially a completely standalone Marvel-centric fighting game. But what made this game so unique from other fighting games is the type of playstyle that it did feature, which didn't just fall under the fighting game genre, but was technically also a third-person action-adventure game, featuring a completely layered single-player campaign revolving around the entirety of the Marvel Universe, but also featuring brand new, never-before-seen characters within the world of Marvel. Hence where the title Rise of the Imperfects comes from. Because alongside of fighting as well-known characters like Spider-Man, Venom, Wolverine, The Thing, Iron Man, and so on, you were also able to play as completely original characters within this game's story and the Marvel Universe like Hazmat, Fault Zone, Brigade, Paragon, and more. And while this game's overall visual art style and story might have not aged the best in comparison to some of the other high-quality Marvel games that we have received since then, it still is fun nonetheless to simply pick one of your favorite Marvel characters and battle them within a fighting game genre. There's also the other Marvel game that EA could potentially revive if this rumor ends up happening, titled Marvel Chaos, which was actually a cancelled Marvel fighting project, which was also being developed by EA at the time of the release of Marvel Nemesis. And the main thing that I love about both of these games is that they're technically a 3D-centric brawler featuring Marvel characters instead of the much more close quarters 2D fighting style that we have seen in much more mainstream fighting games like Mortal Kombat, Marvel vs. Capcom, and of course the Injustice series. And this is definitely where my own personal preference comes into play, because I'm not the biggest fan of 2D-centric fighting games like those I just mentioned, but instead, I'm much more of a fan of a fighting game like Soul Calibur, where it gives you a bit more of environmental freedom and maneuverability when it comes to controlling your characters within the battlefield. Instead of just moving from left to right, you are able to move left, back, and side to side throughout the entirety of the game's arena, giving the player a lot more options and freedom when it comes to planning out attacks, rather than simply trying to back up or go forward and or jump or duck a certain enemy's attack within a 2D setting. And in the case of Marvel Nemesis, that is where the developers over at EA took things to the nth degree, where the players were given absolute freedom to completely traverse on the entirety of the game's battle stage however they saw fit, and made each match within the game felt a lot more spacious and welcoming welcoming versus the much more closed-off, close-quarters combat that we expect in standard 2D fighting games. I know a lot of people might be extremely hesitant towards this game simply because EA is attached to it, knowing their overall business practices in the recent years, but back when Marvel Nemesis first released in 2005, EA was a completely different studio than how they operate now. And luckily, Marvel Nemesis wasn't plagued by any type of microtransactions or live service elements that we do see in some other EA games. So if this game ends up happening, I definitely think we could see a much more simple and straightforward release with maybe some potential DLC characters added down the line, but nothing too crazy or malevolent when it comes to EA trying to put a bigger price on a Marvel licensed property. Either way, I just have a massive soft spot for Marvel Nemesis, and if it was to somehow make a return, or if EA were to develop a Marvel game in a similar vein like Marvel Nemesis, I for one would be beyond ecstatic, and would easily buy that game on its day one release. But with all that said, everybody, that's the video I have for you today, and please let me know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. What do you think of this rumor pertaining to Marvel and EA possibly making another Marvel-centric fighting game? And would you like it to be a complete sequel of Marvel Nemesis, or be something completely new and original? Let me know what you think. Be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy, and for more Marvel games videos like this in the future. And without further ado, peace out.